Miss Carter had that kind of quiet authority that made a room still. She didn't need to raise her voice. 38, sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. The kind of teacher who believed grammar could hold a life together. That Tuesday morning, her classroom smelled of dry erase markers and coffee gone cold. She reminded her juniors about the assignment, a personal narrative, something true, something that matters. Most students turned in the usual vacations, football injuries, family trips. She flipped through essays one after another, blue pen in hand, her mind already halfway home. Then she reached one stapled with the name Eli Turner, 16, quiet, the kind of kid who blended into walls. The title read, What I Never Said. She started reading. My father's been in prison for 7 years. I used to think it was my fault. She froze. Her hand stayed midair, pen uncapped, breath shallow. She read another line. He told me to keep studying, so maybe one day I'd talk to my son through glass, not bars. It hit something buried, a memory she'd trained herself to keep sealed. She blinked hard, forcing the words back into ink and paper. But the page wouldn't let her. The words had a pulse. They reached out. And suddenly she was 12 again, sitting in a prison visiting room in upstate New York, pretending not to recognize the man in the orange jumpsuit. A chair scraped. A girl whispered for a hall pass. Miss Carter nodded automatically, still stuck between past and present. Eli was watching her from the back, row careful eyes, a kind of fragile honesty that made it worse. She felt heat rise in her chest. Not anger exactly, more like panic. That essay had opened something she wasn't ready to look at. Eli, she said, her voice tighter than she meant. Stand up. The room quieted fast. Every head turned. This, she said, holding up the paper, is not what I asked for. I said personal narrative, not confession. He didn't move, didn't argue, just stood there, small and still. And before she could stop herself, before reason could catch up to shame, she tore the paper in half. Then again, the sound was thin but final, like something delicate breaking. Gasps scattered around the room. Turn in another one tomorrow, she said. Steady, professional, mechanical. The bell rang too soon. Students filed out, whispering, not sure what they'd just seen. Eli picked up his backpack, walked past her desk without a glance. She thought about calling his name, but the words stuck somewhere between her chest and her throat. 10 minutes later, she locked herself in the teacher's restroom, pressed her forehead against the cool tile. The first tear came without permission, then another. She didn't cry like a teacher. She cried like someone who had just broken something she didn't know how to fix. Not the essay herself. The rest of the day moved like fog. Meetings, attendance sheets, the hum of the copy machine, all of it, a blur she clung to, just to avoid thinking. In the teacher's lounge, someone whispered her name. Another asked if she was okay. She smiled the practiced smile of someone who spent years keeping feelings out of her job. By the last period, word had traveled. The principal called her in polite, careful tone. Just be mindful, Rebecca. Kids these days, they open up about things. We have to handle it gently. She nodded, said she understood. But what she really wanted to ask was, who handles us? When the halls emptied, she went back to her classroom. The shredded paper was still in the trash can, white curls of confession, mixed with gum wrappers and pencil shavings. She looked at it for a long time, then shut the door and turned off the light. But she couldn't leave. Her mind kept replaying the way Eli's eyes had looked steady, forgiving, almost. She ended up in the computer lab. Old desktops humming, that drier smell of electronics. She typed his name into the student folder directory and found it. Turner _Eli _essay draft.docx. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, telling herself not to open it. Then she clicked. The same title appeared, What I Never Said. She started reading again, slower this time. The story wasn't about crime, it was about silence. About how people stop talking when they're ashamed of someone they love. When I see teachers talk about role models, I think about my dad's hand shaking when he tried to write me a birthday card. Her throat tightened. It wasn't manipulation. It was truth, unpolished and pure, and she had torn it apart. She sat back in the rolling chair, eyes on the blinking cursor. Then she began typing, no plan, no script. Eli, today I got something wrong. Not your writing, me. I read your truth and couldn't handle mine. Stopped, deleted it, rewrote, deleted again. Every sentence sounded like a plea. So she typed one final line and let it sit there. If you'll let me, I'd like to read it again with you this time. She saved the note, but didn't send it. She just stared at the blue glow of the monitor until the room felt like water. Then she printed what was left of his essay from the draft, took it home, and spread the pages on her kitchen table with tape and trembling hands. She pieced the torn version together, one strip at a time. The words didn't line up perfectly. Some were missing. Some were forever gone. Still, when she looked at it under the yellow light, it read like something living imperfect, scarred, but still breathing. She placed it in a folder labeled Lesson Plans, and in the corner wrote one word in pen: learn. That night, lying in bed, she didn't think about her students or her job. She thought about glass walls, about fathers, about the things we tear apart because we don't know how to hold them. And for the first time in years, she hoped tomorrow came slow just enough to let her try again. The morning after, Ms. Carter arrived earlier than usual, like time itself might give her a head start if she showed up before it began. The hallways were still, the janitor's cart parked outside her door, the smell of floor wax clinging to everything. She set her coffee down and opened the folder where she'd placed Eli's reconstructed pages. The taped seams caught the light like faint scars. She touched them the way people touch old photographs, careful, almost apologetic. The first bell hadn't rung yet. She sat at her desk and let her eyes rest on the torn lines. The writing pulled her back to a place she avoided even inside her own head. A Department of Corrections waiting room, upstate vinyl chairs. A TV playing a game show no one watched. A poster about second chances that felt like an inside joke. She was 12, wearing a sweater too warm for the room. Her mother had practiced the sentence in the car: "We love him, but we don't excuse him." Rebecca had nodded, like that made it easier. She remembered the sound of keys and the heavy door. The way everyone's posture changed when the men in orange walked in, like the air itself stood straighter. Her father waved with a smile that stretched but didn't reach his eyes. He asked about school. He always asked about school, like grades could fix the leak in the floor. The guard told them time was up just as he was trying to write her a joke on a napkin. His hand shook. The pen left a jittery line. He laughed at himself. She pretended to laugh with him. On the ride home, her mother told her she didn't owe the world her father's story. Rebecca took that as an assignment. Build a life that never cracks. When she started teaching, grammar felt like a safe architecture. Rules that, if honored, might keep storms outside. She learned to speak about craft, about voice, about audience. She learned to redirect kids who wrote about pain toward metaphors and structure, and the system praised her for it. Test scores went up. Parents thanked her for keeping it academic. Meanwhile, she kept her past folded tight like a receipt you don't want to find. Now Eli's words had pride at that fold. How do I write without betraying who I am? He had asked the question she'd been dodging for 26 years. The mirror he held up didn't show a monster. It showed a woman who'd mistaken control for care. A woman afraid that if a student's truth walked freely into her classroom, hers might slip in after it. The bell rang. Students thinned into seats, jackets dropping, backpacks unzipping, life resuming its usual noise. She passed out a worksheet she didn't believe in, pretended to care about her positives for the first 10 minutes, because it was easier than looking for Eli. When the attendance sheet came back, his name was an empty box. It made the page look lopsided. She taught anyway. That's what you do in schools. You keep moving. But midway through, she caught herself staring at the closed door, listening for footsteps that didn't come. She finished class, posted a prompt graded quietly, while teenagers wrote around her. Every so often, her eyes drifted to the folder. We love him, but we don't excuse him. The old sentence returned, changed shape. What if love isn't the opposite of standards? What if love is the standard? The period ended. She exhaled and finally admitted what she already knew. Yesterday wasn't about maintaining boundaries. It was about keeping a lock on a room inside herself, and locks left on too long rust. She decided to find him during advisory. She rehearsed a sentence on the walk to the counseling office. Eli, I read your draft in the system. I shouldn't have, but I did. And I'm sorry for what I did in class. She practiced keeping it short. No justifications, no tidy moral. Just an apology a kid could carry without feeling indebted. The counselor's office was warm. A diffuser humming lavender into the air. A bulletin board peppered with college pennants and crisis hotline numbers. Eli Turner, Ms. Carter asked. The counselor checked her screen, frowned gently. He's not in today. Mom called him out. Family matter. The phrase landed softly and still left a bruise. Family matter. She thanked the counselor, then stood in the hall, unsure what to do with her hands. Back in her room, she opened her laptop, found her unsent note, reread it, and started over. She typed, deleted, typed again. She changed, I'm sorry too, I apologize. Then back to I'm sorry because real language rarely wears a suit. She added one line, if you need space, I'll give it. If you want to talk, I'll listen. She hovered over send and didn't press it. FARPA wasn't the problem, fear was. Not of getting in trouble, of doing it wrong again. Third period brought a knock. The assistant principal, Mr. Davies, friendly and brisk, motioned her into the hall. Just a reminder, he said, voice pitched to kind. Keep boundaries clear, especially when students share sensitive stuff. Loop us in. Loop counseling in. You don't have to carry it alone. He meant well. She nodded. Of course, he added lower. We got a report Eli had an incident in the cafeteria yesterday. Nothing major. A comment. A shove. He walked away. He's fine. Just. Eyes open. The words pressed on a sore spot. Was the shove before or after she tore the essay? What do you measure blame with when time and shame overlap? At lunch, she ate half a granola bar and pretended it was enough. She printed the note, folded it once, slid it into an envelope with his name. When the final bell rang, she walked to the main office to leave it in his mailbox. The secretary glanced up. We don't usually put personal notes in student boxes, she said, gentle but firm. Email's better, or go through counseling. Ms. Carter said okay. Thanked her, kept the envelope anyway. Like a talisman she wasn't allowed to use. On her way back, she saw a small cluster of boys laughing too loudly. One of them said Eli's name like a dare. She caught eyes with the ringleader long enough for him to look down. It didn't fix anything. It just reminded her how loud a building can be about the quietest kids. Last period crawled. The empty desk in the third row felt like an accusation and an invitation at the same time. She adjusted the seating chart, then changed it back. She set out a makeup assignment for anyone absent, then slid it into the folder with his name written in the corner. She imagined what she'd say if he walked in. Not a speech, just a simple truth. You were brave. I wasn't. After school, she stood in the parking lot longer than she needed to, watching buses hiss and pull away. She texted the counselor to flag her concern without turning Eli into a case file. She typed, "Student opened up in writing. I mishandled it. Would like support when he returns," she added. Also, please check in on him. She hit send on that one. Small, procedural, imperfect, but something at home. The envelope sat on her kitchen table like a question mark. She poured coffee she didn't want, stared at the taped pages again, and heard her mother's voice from years ago. You don't owe anyone his story. She set the envelope beside the folder and whispered to the empty room. But I owe him mine, at least the part that explains the harm. She didn't know if he'd want it. She didn't know if she'd make it worse. She only knew that the cost of doing nothing was already charging interest by Thursday morning. The story had started to travel, the kind of rumor that stretches and bends until no one remembers where it began. In the teacher's lounge, a social studies teacher whispered, "Did you hear about the essay thing?" Another replied, "Yeah, something about trauma boundaries." Then both looked up when Ms. Carter walked in, their smiles a little too polite, her coffee stirring a little too long. She poured herself a cup and pretended not to notice. That's what you do when your name turns into a headline no one will print. By second period, she'd gotten the email. Meeting at 10:15, student conduct concern. No explanation, no signature beyond Office of Administration. She read it twice, heart thudding with that familiar mix of defensiveness and shame. At 10:14, she knocked on the office door. The principal, Ms. Green, was waiting with the counselor and the assistant principal. Professional smiles, not unkind, just careful. "Rebecca," Ms. Green began, "we got a few calls from parents. Apparently a student recorded part of class on Tuesday. It's already making the rounds on social media." Ms. Carter blinked. "Recorded what part?" "The moment you tore the essay." There it was, the verb she'd been avoiding. Tore. They didn't accuse. They framed it in language designed to manage liability, optics, emotional safety, appropriate response. She listened, hands folded tight in her lap, until the words started sounding like static. Finally she said, "It was a mistake. I overreacted. I've already reached out to counseling to make sure he's supported." Ms. Green nodded. "That's good. But there's still the matter of perception. Parents saw a teacher humiliating a student over something personal. We need to make sure that doesn't happen again." Humiliating. The word landed like glass shattering in her chest. When the meeting ended, she walked back through the hall, trying to look composed. But every whisper felt heavier now, every glance sharper. She thought of Eli again. Whether he'd seen the clip, whether he hated her for confirming every adult suspicion that vulnerability is a trap. At lunch, she sat alone in her classroom, staring at the taped essay still inside the folder. She wanted to hide it, to burn it, to erase the evidence of her worst moment. But part of her couldn't. It felt wrong to destroy it twice. The intercom crackled. "Ms. Carter, please report to the main office." Her pulse spiked. When she arrived, the receptionist gave her a small, sealed envelope. "A parent dropped this off for you." She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper. "Ms. Carter, I know about what happened. I just wanted you to know Eli spoke highly of you before all this. Said you were the first teacher who made him feel his words mattered. He's staying home for a few days. Please don't be too hard on yourself, Lydia Turnermis." Carter held the letter for a long time, her fingers trembling around the edges. Forgiveness, she thought, shouldn't feel this heavy. By Friday, Eli's desk was still empty. Students had stopped asking about him out loud. But the absence had its own gravity, pulling glances, slowing conversations. When she called attendance, her voice always faltered for a beat before his name. The day dragged. During fifth period, she overheard two students whispering near the window. My mom said that teacher got suspended. She's still here. I saw her car, then maybe the kids transferring. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Ms. Carter pretended not to hear, just underlined thesis statement on the board with a squeak of marker. After class, she found herself alone again, surrounded by the leftover noise of chairs scraping and papers fluttering. She picked up one of the abandoned assignments, a half-finished paragraph that began, "Sometimes you mess up, but it doesn't mean you're bad. It just means you didn't know better yet." She didn't recognize the handwriting, but it pierced through her. That afternoon, the counselor stopped by her room. "I talked to Eli's mom," she said softly. "He's taking it hard. Not angry, just withdrawn. They're trying to get him to see someone." Ms. Carter nodded, jaw tight. "I want to apologize, but I don't want to make it worse." "That's fair," the counselor said. "When he's ready, I'll ask if he's open to it. For now, just be patient." After the counselor left, the quiet pressed in like fog. She sat behind her desk and opened the taped essay again. Her eyes caught on a line she'd missed before, buried near the bottom. "Sometimes silence is just someone trying not to make things worse." She exhaled a long, shaky breath, realizing she'd become the very sentence he wrote. That night, she stayed late grading. The janitor passed by, nodded kindly. "Rough week, huh?" She forced a half smile. "Yeah." When she finally packed up, the hallways were dark, except for the exit signs glowing red. She stopped outside Eli's locker, the combination tag still hanging loose. For a long moment, she just stood there. Then she slid the envelope she'd written days ago through the slats. No note attached this time, no corrections, no lecture. Just one folded page, with 7 words written by hand. "You were brave." "I wasn't. I'm sorry." As she walked away, the building echoed with its usual after-hours hum air vents. Lights clicking, the world continuing without her permission. She wasn't sure if Eli would ever read it. But for the first time, she didn't care about control, or optics, or form. She'd spent her whole life teaching others how to write clearly. Now, she was finally learning how to mean it. Monday morning brought a kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace. Miss Carter had grown used to the stairs, the polite avoidance in the halls. What she hadn't expected was the knock at her classroom door just before first period. When she opened it, a woman stood there holding a paper bag from the bakery down the street. Double quotes, Ms. Carter. It took a second, but she recognized her from the note. Eli's mother, Lydia Turner. Early 40s, tired eyes, polite smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to drop something off. And to talk, if that's okay." As Carter motioned for her to come in, Lydia set the bag on a desk, still standing. "Eli's back at school tomorrow. He told me I could tell you that." "That's good," Miss Carter said, unsure where to look. Lydia studied her face for a long moment. He was embarrassed. Not just about what happened, about being seen. He didn't want to write that essay at first. Said no one wanted to read about a kid with a dad in prison. I told him, if it's true, it's worth writing. And he believed me. For once, he believed me. Miss Carter felt the sentence cut in. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice small. "I don't have an excuse. Lydia lifted a hand gently. "I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here because he still respects you." That's the part that surprised me. She gave a faint, weary laugh. He said, "She's the first person who actually read me, even if she hated what she found." The words cracked something open in Miss Carter that she'd been trying to keep shut. "I didn't hate it," she said, almost whispering. "I think I hated the mirror it held up." Lydia nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "I get that. Believe me, I get that." The bell rang outside. A wave of voices flooding the hallway. Lydia took a step toward the door. "He's gonna come tomorrow. I told him he'd probably say something. Just keep it simple. He doesn't need perfect. He just needs you to mean it." Miss Carter swallowed hard. "I can do that." Before leaving, Lydia turned back and said softly, "I used to blame myself for his dad, for everything. But I learned something. Sometimes you don't have to fix the story. You just have to stop hiding it." When she left, Miss Carter stood there for a long moment, the sound of lockers slamming outside fading into background noise. She sat at her desk, opened the folder, and traced the faint tape lines again. She thought about her own father, how she'd stopped visiting when she turned 16, how she'd told everyone he'd moved away. She'd built a life on distance. And now it was asking for rent. That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in 20 years. She looked up the name Thomas Carter in the state inmate registry. The file appeared instantly, a mugshot older than she remembered, eyes softer than she expected. She stared at it until the clock in the corner of her screen told her she'd been sitting there for 40 minutes. Then she closed the laptop, picked up her keys, and drove. The prison was 2 hours north, far enough that you could almost believe it wasn't there if you stopped thinking about it. She hadn't been there since she was 16, the age Eli was now. The same gray fences, the same line of cars in the visitor lot. Even the guard tower looked smaller than she remembered. Like time had quietly taken its toll. She checked in, hands trembling slightly as she handed over her ID. "Who are you visiting?" the officer asked. "Thomas Carter." The name came out flat, like it belonged to someone else. She was escorted to a room where plastic chairs lined up against plexiglass partitions. She sat down and waited, palms pressed together, his heart somewhere near her throat. Then he walked in, older, thinner, with a beard that tried to hide the years. When he saw her, he stopped. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he smiled, tentative, careful. "Becky." No one had called her that in decades. She nodded. "I didn't think you'd ever come back," he said, sitting across from her. His voice was rough, but not unkind. "I didn't either," she admitted. They sat in silence, the kind that fills rooms when there's too much to say and no clear place to begin. Finally, he said, "Your mom wrote me a few times, told me you became a teacher. I'm proud of that." The words hit in a strange way. Not comfort, exactly, but something close. "I teach English," she said. "I tell kids their words matter." He nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." Then, after a pause, "So why now?" She hesitated. "Because I hurt someone who reminded me of you, or maybe of me, when you left." He studied her face, eyes softening. "You always thought feeling made you weak. You got that from me?" She almost laughed, but it came out like a breath. "Maybe." For a long while, they talked about nothing. The weather, books she'd read, how he'd started helping others get their GEDs inside. Then, before leaving, she asked, "Do you ever regret what you did?" He looked at her, steady, every day. "But regret's easy. Doing something with it, that's the hard part." She nodded, the line sinking deeper than she expected. When she stood to leave, he said, "Rebecca, don't spend your life teaching kids how to sound right. Teach them how to be honest, even when it scares you." On the drive home, the sky had that late autumn color that almost looks like forgiveness. Muted, cold, but still light. She rolled down the window, let the air sting a little. When she got home, she found the taped essay still on her kitchen table. She sat down, read it one last time, and whispered, "Okay, tomorrow we start over." The next morning, Ms. Carter left home before sunrise. The air was sharp, the sky still the color of wet paper. She parked in the school lot and sat there for a few minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to rehearse a version of the day that didn't collapse under the weight of yesterday. Eli was supposed to be back. She'd repeated that sentence to herself all night, like a mantra. He's coming back. When the first bell rang, she stood by the classroom door, pretending to tidy the bulletin board, pretending she wasn't watching every face that passed. Then she saw him. Same backpack, same quiet posture, eyes lower than before. He hesitated in the doorway, and for a heartbeat she thought he might turn around, but he didn't. He just nodded, almost imperceptibly, and slipped into his seat. Class began. She talked about essays, structure, voice, the language she knew best, but her mind kept drifting to the folded paper he hadn't yet found in his locker. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd thrown it away. She tried not to wonder. Midway through the lesson, she caught him glancing at her. Not angry, not even guarded, just uncertain. And she realized that trust doesn't break with one moment. It leaks out slowly. Takes longer to fill again. After class, when the last student left, she called gently Eli. He paused in the doorway. "I wanted to say thank you for coming back." Gave a small shrug. "Mom said I should." His voice cracked slightly, that blend of humor and defense that kids use when they're still deciding whether to forgive you. "I read your essay again," she said softly. "The part about glass. I understand it now." He didn't answer, just nodded, eyes on the floor. "I'm not asking you to trust me," she added. "I just wanted you to know I'm still reading." He hesitated, then said okay, and walked away. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't nothing. After school, Carter checked the system. His name was marked present for the first time all week. That small green check beside his name looked like a heartbeat on a monitor. She stared at it too long. Still, something in her couldn't rest. She wanted to do more, say more, fix what she'd broken. But Lydia's words echoed, "He doesn't need perfect. He just needs you to mean it." So that night she printed his essay again, on clean paper this time. She read it out loud in her kitchen, her voice shaking, but steadying with each line. Then she took out a blank page and wrote him a letter she didn't know she was capable of writing. "Eli, you asked how to write without betraying who you are. I think the answer is, you can't. Not completely. Every truth costs something, but some truths are worth the price." She folded it, slid it into an envelope, and taped it to the front of his essay. On the outside, she wrote only, "For Eli, whenever you're ready." She put it in her bag. Tomorrow, she'd return what she took. The next afternoon, she found Eli sitting on the front steps after the final bell, earbuds in, watching the parking lot thin out. She almost turned around. The courage she'd felt that morning was fading with the light, but she'd come this far. "Hey," she said. Stepping closer, he pulled one earbud out, cautious, but not unfriendly. "I wanted to give you something." She handed him the envelope. "It's yours." "The essay too?" He looked at it, hesitant. "You already gave it back once," he said. "This time, I'm not grading it." That earned half a smile. He took it slowly, like it might still burn. "You really read it again?" "Twice," she said. "It's better than anything I could have written at your age." He nodded, quiet. "My mom said you came to see my dad." She blinked. "She told you?" "Yeah." He looked away toward the street. "He's still in. He used to tell me people stop showing up after the first few years. Said it's easier to be gone than to be remembered wrong." Ms. Carter felt the words hit in her ribs. "He's not wrong," she said. "But maybe showing up is how we start to remember, right?" They sat there for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. Then he said, "I don't hate you, you know." "I didn't think you did," she said. "Good," he replied. "Because I'm still using that essay for the writing competition?" She smiled then, real and small. "You should." He stood, adjusting his backpack. "You know," he said, "you didn't ruin it. You just made it more complicated. That's life, right?" "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's life." He walked away toward the buses, the envelope still in his hand. She watched until he disappeared into the crowd. When she got home that evening, she opened her laptop to grade papers, but couldn't focus. She kept thinking about how forgiveness doesn't always come as a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just a kid not walking away. She took the old torn copy from her drawer, the one patched with tape, and pressed it flat against the new one she'd printed. The seams didn't line up, but together they looked whole in their own way. She slid both into a folder labeled "For Me," to remember, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she'd written something true. By the end of the week, the air in the school felt different. Lighter for some, heavier for her. Ms. Carter walked into the principal's office on Friday morning already knowing what the meeting was about. Ms. Green had that diplomatic tone in her email again. "Let's discuss next steps regarding the classroom incident." She sat down across from the principal and the HR representative, a woman from the district she'd never met before. Everyone smiled too much, the way people do before they hand you bad news politely. "Rebecca," Ms. Green began, "we appreciate how you've handled this since it happened. You've shown accountability, and Eli's mother has spoken highly of your efforts to make amends." Carter nodded, waiting for the but, Ms. Green continued gently. "Because of the visibility of the situation, the district recommends a short suspension, 2 weeks, paid just to let things settle. It's less about punishment and more about optics. You understand?" She did understand. She'd used that same kind of language herself when she wanted to sound reasonable about something deeply unfair. "I understand," she said quietly. The HR rep nodded sympathetically, sliding over a form that used words like administrative leave and professional reflection period. After the meeting, she packed up her things from the classroom, her books, the mug with faded lettering that said "Grammar Saves Lives," a stack of essays she still planned to read at home. Her students watched through the window as she carried the box down the hall. No one said anything, but one girl, Ava, whispered she doesn't deserve that, just loud enough for her to hear. Outside, the autumn wind cut through her jacket as she crossed the parking lot. 2 weeks! A pause, they called it. But it felt like the kind of pause people take before deciding whether or not to come back. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine, something she rarely did. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, folders, and the echo of her own decisions. The taped essay lay in front of her again. She couldn't seem to keep it away for long. She read the line that had started it all. Out loud to the empty room, "He told me to keep studying, so I'd never talk to my son through glass." She realized then that Eli's father and hers might never meet, but they'd already built the same wall in her mind. She'd spent years decorating it, pretending it wasn't there. And in a moment of fear, she'd made Eli feel the same shame she'd carried her whole life. The phone buzzed. It was a text from Lydia Turner. "I heard about the suspension. I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I think you did the hardest part already. You told the truth." Ms. Carter stared at the message, smiling without meaning to. She typed back, "Thank you. Maybe this is what learning actually looks like." She didn't hit send. She just watched the blinking cursor for a long time, the rhythm of it strangely comforting. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, 2 weeks. I can live with that. For the first time in months, she felt tired in a way that wasn't defeat, just release. Her suspension week was quiet. Mornings with no alarm, afternoons filled with the hum of laundry and the radio. She graded the leftover essays just to feel useful, though she didn't have to. Every so often, she'd glance at the folder labeled "For Me to Remember." On Thursday afternoon, she checked her mailbox and found a small manila envelope with no return address. Her name, written in neat block letters across the front. No school logo. No district seal. Just her name inside was a single printed page, double-spaced, with the title on forgiveness. No signature, but she didn't need one. She recognized the voice. People think forgiveness is a gift you give someone else. But maybe it's the only way to stop the story from ending where it started, when Ms. Carter tore up my essay. I thought it meant my story wasn't worth hearing, but now I think she just couldn't hear her own yet. She says she teaches writing, but really she teaches people to look at what they're scared of and write anyway. That's what I'm trying to do. I hope she does too. Sometimes we don't get the perfect apology or the clean ending. Sometimes all we get is someone trying, and maybe that's enough. E.T.Ms. Carter's eyes blurred halfway through. She set the paper down, hands trembling. The words were raw, simple, not written for praise, but for peace. She read it again. Slower this time. The last line stayed with her. Sometimes all we get is someone trying. She folded the page carefully, almost reverently, and placed it beside the taped essay on her desk. The two looked like they belonged together. One torn, one whole. Both honest. When her suspension ended the next week, she walked back into the building with steady steps. A few teachers gave polite nods. A few avoided eye contact. None of it mattered. On her desk waited a fresh stack of student essays and a post-it note in messy handwriting. "Welcome back, Ms. C." She smiled, not the practiced, professional smile, a real one, small and quiet, that afternoon. She taught about narrative tension, how stories change when characters tell the truth. She didn't mention Eli by name, but when she said, "Sometimes the hardest part isn't writing, it's not hiding," her voice caught just enough for the class to notice. No one laughed. They just listened. When the bell rang, she sat for a long time, looking out the window at the falling leaves, thinking that maybe grace isn't given all at once, maybe something you learn to teach yourself. She looked down at her desk, whispered, "Thank you, Eli." And for the first time, the word teacher didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a promise. Spring came slow that year, the way forgiveness sometimes does. By March, the snow outside the windows had melted into muddy patches. The air smelled faintly of rain and pencil shavings. Ms. Carter's suspension was over. But something in her teaching had quietly changed. Her students noticed first. She smiled more now, but not the polite, clipped kind. She asked about their weekends and actually listened to the answers. Her lessons shifted from perfect grammar to honest writing. She still corrected commas, but she did it gently, like tending a wound instead of pointing one out. Then came the email from the district office. An opening for a part-time evening program, GAD prep for adults, low pay, long hours. Most teachers passed on it. She showed up that first Tuesday evening to a classroom that smelled faintly of coffee and second chances. Her students were nothing like the ones in her morning classes. Construction workers, young mothers, a retired man who said he just wanted to prove to himself he could still learn. And sitting in the back, quiet as always, was a man with a familiar posture and a scar running across his knuckles. His name tag read L. Turner. It took her a second, but she realized Eli's father. He avoided her eyes at first, but when she passed by his desk, he said, barely above a whisper, "My son told me you were a good teacher." She froze for half a beat, then smiled softly. "Your son's a good writer." That night, when class ended, he waited by the door. "He's doing better," he said. Still quiet, but better. "He said you helped him win that writing contest." She nodded. "He helped me win something too." They didn't say what. They didn't have to. After he left, she sat alone in the empty classroom for a long time. The clock ticked. The lights buzzed softly overhead. She thought about how, for years, she'd believed her job was to make people better at language. Now she understood it was about helping them find the words they'd been too afraid to say. As she packed up her things, she glanced at the blackboard, where someone had written, "It's never too late to learn." She smiled. Whoever wrote it probably meant reading and math, but she knew better. The next morning, she pinned that same sentence above her desk in the main classroom. Beneath it, she wrote a smaller one in blue chalk, "And it's never too late to begin again." By June, the halls were full of the lazy noise that comes before summer break. Sneakers squeaking, locker doors slamming, the countdown to freedom humming in the air. Ms. Carter was cleaning out her desk, one drawer at a time, when she found the old folder again. The taped essay, Eli's letter, her own handwritten apology, a trilogy of mistakes and mending. She sat there a moment, reading the first page, the one she'd once torn apart. "My father's been in prison for 7 years. Used to think it was my fault." She traced the tape line that ran through the middle of the sentence, her thumb resting on the word fault. She smiled, not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because the hurt finally meant something. A knock on the door pulled her back. It was Eli, taller now, with that quiet, self-contained calm of someone who's starting to belong in his own skin. "Hey," he said. "Mom wanted me to drop this off." He handed her a photo of him standing on stage with a medal around his neck, a microphone nearby. The words Youth Voices Essay Contest printed on the banner behind him. "You won," she said softly. He shrugged, half grinning. They said it was honest. "Guess I learned from the best." She laughed, shaking her head. "You learned despite me." "No," he said, serious now, "because you showed me what not to hide." There it was again. That strange, steady grace he carried, the kind that made her think maybe the world wasn't as broken as she'd once believed. After he left, she tucked the photo inside the folder and wrote one more note on the cover. "The stories we try to erase are the ones that end up teaching us how to tell the truth." She placed the folder on the highest shelf in her cabinet, not to forget it, but to keep it safe. That evening, before leaving, she walked through the empty halls, stopping at her own classroom door. The desks were stacked, the lights dim. On the chalkboard, the same sentence remained from months ago. "It's never too late to begin again," she whispered. "You were right, Dad," out really knowing if she was talking to him or herself. Then she turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, following behind her. And outside, the first fireflies of summer began to blink in the dusk breeze. Gentle flashes that didn't last long but were enough to see by. Years later, when people asked Ms. Carter why she still taught, she never said for the love of learning or to make a difference. She'd smile and say, "Because stories keep us honest." Most didn't understand what she meant, but that was okay. Not everything needed translation. Every now and then, she'd get an email from a former student, a line or two. Nothing fancy. Some told her they'd gotten into college. Others said they'd started writing again. Once, she opened a message from Eli. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." Inside was a photo of him standing in front of a community center sign that said, "Youth Writing Workshop Instructor, Eli Turner." No explanation, no long paragraph, just the picture and one sentence beneath it. "Still trying, like you said." She stared at it for a long time, smiling. The framed photo of his essay wins still sat on her bookshelf, next to the folder of taped pages. She kept them close, not as reminders of failure, but of what can grow in the cracks when you stop pretending not to feel. On days when teaching felt heavy budget cuts, empty chairs, endless paperwork, she'd pull that folder down, run her thumb along the jagged tape line, and remember that being human had always been the hardest lesson to grade. And sometimes, when she stood before a new group of students, she'd begin the semester with the same words. "Everything we write costs something. The trick is deciding what's worth the price." She never mentioned Eli's name or her father's. She didn't need to. The truth had already found its way into her voice. Quiet, steady, unashamed. She'd learned that redemption doesn't come in a single moment. It arrives slowly, in fragments. Sometimes it looks like forgiveness. Sometimes it just looks like showing up again. And when her students asked why she always ended class with the same line, "It's never too late to begin again," she'd smile. Because she knew exactly whose story had written it first. The years blurred. Years do. But one thing never changed. The sound of paper in her hands. The rustle of essays. The quiet pause before reading something true. Every story reminded her that the smallest acts can change everything. A torn page, a second chance, a letter returned. Sometimes, when the classroom emptied out, she'd sit alone at her desk and think about how far a story can travel, from a boy's trembling handwriting to a stage, to another generation of students learning to tell the truth a little louder than before. She no longer needed the taped essay to remember. It had already written itself into her. That night, as the janitor flicked off the lights, she lingered for a moment longer by the door, her hand resting on the frame. She thought of Eli, of his father, of her own, of every word she'd ever torn and then tried to mend. She looked around the empty room, smiled, and whispered what had become her quiet prayer. "Keep writing, even when it hurts, 'cause somewhere someone needed to hear it." She turned off the light, stepped into the hallway, and let the darkness close gently behind her. Not like an ending, but like a page turning. Have you ever tried to fix something you broke, not because you had to, but because you couldn't stand to leave it wrong? If you have, then you already know this story. You already know her, and maybe in some small way you are her. You ever been through something like that? If you have, hit the like button and subscribe, because stories like this aren't really about them, they're about us.